Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.
The new Dignitas lineup has been confirmed for the LCS by announcing each of the 5 players as they signed them. Now, technically, Dignitas returned this year, not 2020, because obviously they bought into Clutch, but they kept Clutch as the name for basically the end of the season. This is the first return of the real Dignitas. The problem is, to me, it has none of the flavour of Dignitas. It doesn't have the same ownership groups, none of the same players. So to me, it's nothing to do with Dignitas, but I get the idea of buying the name. I think it's a smart idea. You can connect to the past and have some sort of a heritage that goes forwards. In terms of this squad, though, I'm just going to treat them as though when FlyQuest came in the league or Echo Fox came in the league, any of the newer teams, generally 100 Thieves, Golden Guardians, you just see how they are as teams. There's nothing really to carry over. But since we have the roster now, and I only like to really do these videos when the rosters are confirmed, let's run through the roster. So in the top lane, they have the infamous Huni, the guy it cost 2.3 million to get. Now, there was a lot of mockery and derision over paying that much. And I absolutely agree with it. While on the one hand, players like Huni actually will command a massive amount on the market at the moment, thanks to their massive name. In theory, like the history that they have of being successful, never really been truly bad in LCS. And obviously periods where he was absolutely one of the best, if not among the best entire players, never mind just at his role in LCS. So I do agree that they were overpaid, and I wouldn't have staked my whole claim around this guy. But I do still think he will be a strong player. I don't know that he'll be the best top laner. It depends how the rest of the team works out. But he'll always be, I think, a top 4, top 5 top laner at worst in LCS. If he has his champions, it's the right meta. He can be top 3, top 2. I think in this team, he's going to be comparable, since obviously I'm going to look at some of this from kind of Froggen's perspective. I think he's comparable to what Hauntzer was in GGS. I told everyone Hauntzer would turn his career around in GGS, and that he wasn't the player TSM should have let go of. I still think that to this day. I've heard some things behind the scenes, nothing to do with gameplay as to why maybe they did let him go. But I would say this, unlike Hauntzer, I think he has a better carry aptitude. That's because for me, Hauntzer was more of a good player where you can do both. He can be the weak side player, he can be a guy who tanks, he can play, I think he's really good on bruises, and he can play some carries, but I don't want him having carries all the time, and that was part of the issue in Golden Guns. I don't think they could unlock all of his skill set, because they never had a good bot lane, quite frankly. So, to me, Huni's got less of the tank player, obviously, and you have to play through him, but he's pretty good when he does that. And I actually think this team, quite frankly, isn't going to play through bot at all, surely. So as long as they play through top and mid, no problem. Huni can be Huni. Then we go to the jungler, obviously a very key position, not just in general, but in this team in particular, I think. The jungler is Grig, obviously formerly of TSM. Now, I did have big issues with him on TSM. I thought he was like good enough, but he wasn't good enough to be on TSM, like what should be a top 2, top 3 org in the region. I also thought, yes, he had some potential. Like, I like the fact he always had a mixed champion pool. Yeah, he was good on the tank junglers. You could also play some of the others if you wanted to, though. I always thought he had a fairly diverse champion pool. The problem is, I've seen him play for too long. I've seen him have a bunch of different teams of differing skill level, including TSM. And he never quite broke through to me to look anything like an elite jungler. He just looked like an average to above average jungler, depending on what was going on in his career. Then you've got to add in the injury thing, which happened a couple of times now. That's a massive scare away for me. That's already making me concerned. Like, is an academy jungler going to have to be brought up at this point in time? That's something I'd be looking at. Now, I do think the fact he's played with Froggen and Echo Fox in the past means he knows this, and he knows the way Froggen's bread's buttered. And he also, in theory, in those Echo Fox teams, they were also, in theory, playing more to mid and top, you'd figure, right? Now, the mid laner is obviously Froggen, one of my favourite players, formerly of Golden Guardians in this case. I think he was one of the best mids in the LCS overall of 2019. Like, I'm amazed at the people. I know, actually, generally Reddit seems to have a pretty good opinion of him now. I'm amazed at the people who are haters, though, who are kind of like, he wasn't even like top 5, or, oh, you're overrating him. He's just like an okay player who's, you know, he's a bit washed up and he can only play majors. Like, what? Who the fuck do you think was carrying those teams? It wasn't Hauntzer. Go watch all the games. Hauntzer carried second most with Froggen. Sometimes they shared the load, but Hauntzer had his own nightmare games, had his own ones where he picked the wrong champion or got the wrong champion drafted for him. Froggen was one of the only players who in pretty much most of the games could still carve out a niche for himself, give himself a chance, get leads, put himself in position to get kills. There were so many games in 2019, I could probably list off the top of my head 10 games where they were in winning positions, sometimes really good winning positions, sometimes from Froggen's leads and from his kills and team fighting, and then they would just throw the game away. So I actually think it showed his individual ability, even if the team couldn't live up to their team potential, and obviously broke down entirely in the bot lane. I think the jungles went completely to shit. So to me, I don't get it. Like, even if you think Hauntzer like me, I think he was the 3rd or 4th best top laner. Froggen, let's say he's the 3rd or 4th best mid. Then you look at the other roles, jungle, support and ADC. They're bottom 3 or 4 in their roles. Now, without a jungler and without a support in the modern day League of Legends, how the fuck are you supposed to get anywhere close to 4th in the spring split? How are you supposed to be a team contending on the last day for playoffs without any of those key roles, which were the fucking MVP roles in the LCS and in Europe and the LEC? What are people talking about, guys? Obviously, someone like Froggen was having a fantastic season, even though, yes, it's not at the level of his old days, because he didn't even have the team to even have a chance to do any of that. I think there's also decent enough role balance in this team in terms of familiarity and what I've seen him play from before. So he has, guess what? Froggen has played with a forwards-only carry top who wants ganks in his champions all the time. His name was Wicked. Then, okay, yeah, sure, the bot lane can cost him. He's played with weak bot lanes as well, though, quite frankly. Then you've got the whole angle of, what's the jungler to do? That's going to be quite key, right? I'll still say Grig's better than Contracts. He's a way better sense of the game. He's not going to int the way that Contracts did. That's already an upgrade over Contracts. And I'll go ahead and say right now for Froggen, I predict that if this team is anywhere close to top 4, top 5, then you will see a lot more champion pool diversity. You will see him play some things that are not just majors or late game team fighters. I just think he could not do that in his old team because it just would have been suicide to do so. So I think that's a bullshit narrative, has been for a long time, but I understand why people perpetuate. To be fair, he's been on bad teams, so from the outside, maybe it looks like he's choosing what he plays all the time and only relative to his own tastes and comforts. The bot lane is one of the biggest sets of issues, quite frankly, because at the AD carry, we've got Johnsun, spelled with a U instead of an O at the end there. Now, this guy was obviously formerly in TSM Academy as the AD carry. My biggest concern is here. He's never done anything, never seen him do much, quite frankly. I've only rarely ever watched TSM Academy, and quite frankly, I don't think any of those players were going to be through LCS. So, while I don't have much hope for him myself, I will say, if you're going to come into LCS, it's a fucking bloody great support to be put with, right? Someone who can guide you, someone who's got massive experience, someone who's taken ADCs of all differing levels of, I mean, a couple of them quite young, one a legendary, obviously setting his ways like Doublelift, but Stixie and Cody's done newer players. So he's worked with so many AD carries, great player to bring in, this guy who knows a lot about the map and the game in general, as well as his lane. So support Aphromoo is the big one for me. That can be the biggest X factor on this team. If he can get even 70% or 80% close to the old Aphromoo, he will shore up the bot lane. His shot calling element brings a massive factor that for me is very exciting, because there's another thing. I've always wanted Froggen to have really good shot calling in his career. I know he can individually do it for himself. I've never thought he was that good a shot caller on the map though. And I've always thought if someone else could have taken the reins and been really good at it, a Mythy, a Yellow Star, these sorts of players, I would have loved to have seen that. So I think just the potential even of the shot calling of Aphromoo and his game knowledge can potentially be very, very good. And I hope this is where Aphromoo is going to turn it around. I do think he's an evergreen player who can come back to being one of the best players in the league again. It's just whether or not he wants it enough and is willing to put in the hours to do it, not just doesn't want to just chill and get a nice big paycheck and have a victory lap on the way out. So in terms of projecting where this team's going to be, right, I'll actually do a separate video, I think, with my rankings of all the different teams. Like, obviously, in theory, every roster hasn't been announced, but we know them behind the scenes. I think, first and foremost, this year is going to be very interesting in the spring, because I have like 4 or 5 teams I think could play second, third. They're competing for those spots. And then when you go to the middle of the pack, it's really a lot of parity. And some of them are only maybe one player being better than I think from being competing with the next group up. And then at the very bottom, you have like one team, maybe 2 that are shit. And that's about it. So, interestingly, I think they're definitely in the mix in that sense. Like, I think this team likely is probably, at the moment from the rosters I see, the 5th best team in LCS. So I think overall better than GGS. Like, GGS played in a weaker LCS, but then they just, I think, overperformed in the spring. I think there's the potential to go as high as 2nd or 3rd, depending on what happens. Like, I've seen some of those big name team rosters that I think have some big question marks and even some lack of star power in certain positions. So, I will say, to go as high as 2nd or 3rd, you need pretty much all the questions to be answered. Johnsun has to be competent, Aphromoo has to be closer to old Aphromoo, Grig has to do well and not get injured, and then Huni and Froggen just have to be Huni and Froggen. So I would say, yeah, that's not as likely, but there's a world in which they could go crazy and go 2nd and make the playoffs and have a deep run and maybe be in a semis or a final. Yeah, I think that's certainly possible. I will say the bad side of it, if everything goes terribly, if Grig's fucked in terms of injury or just doesn't play well in the game, if Johnson's just utterly the worst ADC and Afromoo's at kind of like last year's 100 Thieves level, then you're probably going to be like the 7th best team, quite frankly. Because if you've got Huni and Froggen, I trust those players to perform and to do their shit. So I don't think with Huni and Froggen, unless the others are really bad, that you're going to be that much lower down than that. I think the worst case scenario, we're talking like 6th or 7th in the league. So I think it's actually quite an exciting team overall. I know a lot of it's kind of implicit value and excitement. It's not stuff that's immediately necessary on the server or you saw last year. But they've got some solid pieces, some decent gambles, and only really one rookie element that still has to completely prove itself. It's a couple of gambles, couple of sure things. Despite the fact that they spent a lot of money, I actually think, like I said, 5th best team. I don't think Dig ended up doing that badly in the off season. I think they've got a pretty good squad all in all. It's just that if you'd have taken a slightly cheaper top laner, maybe you could have had a better AD carry and you could actually then have been going in with 5 names people actually know. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Dane Cuskley, Dean Tanglis, Chi Mao, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Peter the Feeder, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion and Mohammed, Alabdul, Razzaq. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to ask me a question in my monthly Patreon AMA. Would you like teasers on upcoming content that I'm doing? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion directly with me? Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description below.